The story starts on a busy highway where cars are stuck in a huge traffic jam for no clear reason. Confused by the sudden stop, one of the drivers looked in the side mirror and noticed a boy walking calmly down the middle of the road. Something about the boy seemed strange. The driver thought about getting out to ask what was happening but stopped when the boy suddenly jumped onto the roof of a nearby truck. A loud noise came from up ahead, grabbing everyone's attention. People began getting out of their cars to see what was happening above them. A giant gate started to open in the sky. The boy shouted a warning, telling everyone to run because monsters were about to come out. Panic broke out and people quickly left their cars, running in every direction. The boy stayed where he was, gripping his sword tightly as monsters poured out of the gate. He swung his sword with incredible power, destroying them all before they could get far. A few minutes later, raider forces arrived to handle the situation. One of them looked around and noticed something strange. There were no monster bodies on the ground, even though the gate had been opened. Suddenly everyone froze as a powerful creature stepped through the gate. It was a quadradrake, a terrifying monster ranked number 43 on the list of dangerous creatures. Its presence was so intense that the air felt heavy. Raiders of the highest level, known as gold rank or higher, were usually the only ones strong enough to fight such a monster. The quadradrake began to gather flames in its mouth, preparing to launch a massive attack, but before it could do anything, the boy had already moved behind it. With one clean strike, he cut the huge creature in half. The impact of its falling body caused a shock wave that shook the ground. The raiders stared in disbelief, amazed by what they had just seen. One of them noticed a symbol on the boy's jacket, a golden dragon. It was the mark of Lee Seaman, one of the most powerful raiders in the world. But Lee Seaman wasn't always this strong. His story began long before he became a legend. Years ago, someone had told Seaman that taking even one step might seem small, but for someone who had fallen, it could feel like climbing a mountain. That person also said that even a single kind word could help someone struggling to get back up. That mysterious figure reassured Simon that he wasn't a coward. Those words moved him to tears and completely changed his life. After monsters began attacking humans, tearing them apart, the world split into two groups, raiders and non-raiders. Later we see Simon went to the Raider Management Bureau, where the receptionist told him he could go into the lab. He answered with a nervous yes. Aspiring raiders, also called awakened ones, had to get their aura levels checked regularly at the bureau. To become a raider, candidates first had to go through an awakening judgment to see if they had aura. If they passed, they then took a qualification exam. Only those with AA levels above a certain number could continue. Simon knocked on the lab door and greeted the technician. She greeted him back and said they could skip the usual explanation since he had done this test several times before. He nodded. She mentioned that he would need to join the military next year. Although his evaluations had delayed it, they couldn't push it back any longer. He replied that he understood. The technician suggested he try counseling, saying he couldn't stay in this situation forever. Seaman, caught off guard, politely refused and said he just wanted to finish the test and leave. She agreed, but reminded him again about his military enlistment deadline. He laid down in the machine, and after a few moments the technician told him his aura level was still 103, the same as last year. Aura levels usually started at 100 and slowly increased over time, but Simmons' level hadn't gone up since his awakening years ago. No matter how hard he trained or worked, the number never changed. The technician handed him a form to sign. As he filled it out, he thought about how he had once believed he could achieve great things, but reality had shown him otherwise. He got up, thanked the technician, and walked out of the lab. Hours later, night fell and he returned to his small, messy and dimly lit room. He went straight to his computer, eager to check the game rewards he had been waiting for. Instead, he saw a surprising notification that read qualification requirements confirmed. Feeling confused, he clicked on the Transcendent Network button below the message. His screen showed three sections: a tip board, a special member board, and a general member board. Curious, he clicked on the general member board and found it full of posts from different people. Some posts made him laugh as he thought about how some of the writers might still be caught up in their teenage fantasies. Amused, he left a teasing comment on a post by someone named Darman. He jokingly thanked him for his wise words, but added that he could almost hear something breaking like his parents' backs. With humor, he called Di Mugwang a basement dweller and suggested that he go outside for a walk. After closing the site, he hoped his comment might bring DMCW back to reality. He then decided to check the news and was stunned to see an announcement: raider on SJ's rank had been raised from gold to platinum. He stared at the screen in disbelief, amazed by Sun Jen's accomplishment. As he read through the comments, he saw people praising Suanan, which made him furious. Memories of their past battles came rushing back, days when he had faced Sun Jin repeatedly only to be defeated every single time. Now seeing Sun Jin rise to the prestigious platinum rank fueled his frustration even more, and his fists clenched tightly. An anger feeling annoyed, he grabbed a note about his training schedule: 300 squats every day, and an 8 km run as he stared at it. Frustration washed over him. Everything around him felt unbearable, and in his irritation he crumpled the note in his hand. Simon turned to his laptop and began typing, feeling like a failure. He had dropped out of school to chase his dream of becoming the raider, but after years of trying he still couldn't even qualify for the basic exam. Suddenly a notification appeared on his screen, confirming he was finally eligible. He stared at it in disbelief, confused by how this mysterious website kept showing up. As he explored further, he noticed a new user with the ID Wandering Beggar Kim Bong-hok. Out of curiosity, he asked Bong-hak about the name and sarcastically joked that it sounded like he had money problems. Simon even offered to donate, claiming he was a raider. Bong-hok didn't take the joke well, calling Simon rude and questioning what a raider even was. He guessed it must be something from Simon's world. Bong-hok then asked Simon's age, annoyed that he was being casually called brother. Simon, unfazed, asked Bong-hok's age in return. Bong-hok replied that he had stopped counting after 140, saying age didn't matter for someone who was a transcendent. Amused, Simon laughed, thinking Bong-hok was really committed to his role. As he kept scrolling, Simon saw a comment from someone named Grand Wizard Iona. She mentioned wanting to meet him and saving up enough points to do so. Simon jokingly replied that he'd find her first. He had no idea something strange was happening behind him. Feeling confident, he encouraged her to meet him, unaware that a portal was opening right behind him. Suddenly a chilling voice asked what he would do if they actually met. Startled, he spun around and saw a woman floating in the air. Her intense eyes locked onto him as she stepped through the portal. She demanded to know if he was the unemployed bum. Simon, speechless and shocked, Simon struggled to understand what was happening. The woman floated closer, saying she came to see what kind of person he really was. She then asked who Simon truly was. The woman stepped out of the portal and Sion let out a terrified scream. A root shot toward him and wrapped tightly around his body. She told him to stop struggling, but even though he clamped his mouth shut in fear, he kept squirming. Confused by his reaction, she asked why he seemed so weak. Trembling, he begged her to release him, but she only mocked him, saying his abilities were worse than a bug. She questioned how someone like him had managed to connect to the transcendent network. Then flipping him upside down, she called him fatso and poked his face, demanding to know who he really was. Desperate, Simon promised to explain everything, that she let him go. She released him and he landed hard on the floor with a thud. Dazed and in pain, he looked up and nervously asked who she was. She introduced herself as Aina and reminded him of how confident he had been earlier. She then questioned whether he had been truthful about being a raider. Nervously, Sion admitted he was still working toward that goal. This irritated her, and she pressed him to be honest. He explained that in his world, people who used aura hunted beasts and were called raiders. However, not everyone could harness aura. He revealed that he was an awakened one, mean he had a small amount of aura. Still skeptical, Iona demanded proof. Struggling, Simon managed to summon a faint flickering aura, but it quickly faded. Disappointed, Iona asked if that was all he could do, leaving him confused by her high expectations. Frustrated, she covered her face, making her disbelief clear. Ian asked if S was kidding. A surge of her power filled the room, shaking it and scattering objects across the messy floor. Overwhelmed, Sion realized she was a true transcendent, someone with power far beyond what humans could understand. As Iona stepped closer, her fierce expression and chilling voice terrified Simon. He cowered, covering his face and pleading for mercy. Someone knocked on the door, asking if he was okay. He reassured them quickly and overheard people outside talking about what they thought was an earthquake. Once things settled down, Iona muttered in frustration, complaining that she had wasted all her save points for nothing. She demanded to know how someone like Simon had accessed the transcendent network. He stammered, admitting he didn't know. All he had done was turn on his laptop. When she asked what a laptop was, he pointed to the device on his desk, calling it the thing with a light. Curious, she inspected it, wondering if it was this world's version of a communication tool. Then she ordered him to explain more, but he insisted there wasn't much else to say. Noticing a pile of notes behind the laptop, she shifted the topic and asked about his background. He shrugged, saying there wasn't much to tell. He had faced challenges like everyone else and ended up as nothing special. Ian commented on how sad his life sounded, and Simon reluctantly agreed to Sion's surprise. Iona commented that he must have tried his best at some point and asked if that was true. Iona's words, though blunt, held a bit of comfort that encouraged Sion to share more. Sion admitted he was an orphan but had been lucky to be adopted by his current parents. He explained how he was evaluated as an awakened one in school but dropped out due to severe bullying. After leaving school, he started stress eating and despite years of effort hadn't improved his aura level. In 6 years. Ian dismissed his story as boring and he nodded in agreement. Feeling resigned, she stood and announced it was time for her to leave. Relieved, he got up quickly and agreed. As she walked toward the gate, she warned him not to cause trouble on the bulletin board, again threatening to kill him if he did. She also ordered him to post an apology. He nodded, promising to keep it in mind. Just before stepping through the gate, she paused. She reminded him that while the world was unfair, he was still human and had a life to live. She urged him to go out and make something of himself. Simon was touched. He hesitated but still asked if they could meet again someday. Smiling, Iona said that if he truly wanted that, he would need to transcend himself. With that, she stepped through the gate and it closed behind her. Sion noticed a pedal Aina had left behind. He picked it up and stared at the pedal. He wondered if he could one day become a transcendent too. After placing Lana's peel among his notes, Simon returned to the Transcendent Network and sincerely apologized to the transcendent beings. He introduced himself politely as Lee Seaman, an unemployed man, and promised to share his thoughts and insights with them over the next few days. Watching the Transcendent Network became part of his daily routine. Sometime later, Sion noticed that C was online. He greeted Khan and mentioned that it had been a while since he had posted a photo. The Black Lion C, born as the son of a noble family's slave, had become famous as a mercenary after avenging his mother's death by killing his master. From then on, Kane dedicated his life to wiping out noble bloodlines and eventually became the strongest warrior on the continent. Simon looked at a family photo Kane had recently shared from a trip and commented on how much Kane's son looked like both of his parents. Shortly after, someone sent him a direct message. It was Sword Demon P, the greatest sword master on the continent. Simon replied quickly, and P jokingly remarked on how fast he had responded. P then revealed that he had developed feelings for someone and wanted advice on how to win her over. This showed how close they had become, treating each other like brothers. Amused, Seaman asked if person had been feeling lonely and suggested starting with a sincere compliment. He recommended saying something like, "Where have you hidden your wings?" to the girl. Curious, P asked what the wings meant. Sion explained it was a clever way to call her an angel. While admiring her, P was impressed, and Simon added that if she smiled, P could follow up by saying her smile made his heart feel like it might burst. Encouraged by the advice, Sion kept sharing more tips. P thanked him and promised to save up points to visit him in person if the advice worked. Simon agreed, though the promise made him reflect deeply through his interactions with the transcendent beings. Simon had noticed their defining traits. They always kept their promises, never delayed their goals, and faced challenges without hesitation. In contrast, he saw himself as the opposite, hesitant and lazy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he admitted to himself that someone like him could probably never become a raider. Feeling defeated, Simon went to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of alcohol and drank deeply before collapsing onto his messy bed. His eyes filled with tears showed his broken dreams. He regretted ever having the hope of becoming a raider. If it was always going to end like this, he had built his whole future around that goal and still wanted to prove he wasn't wrong for dreaming. But with his aura level stuck at 103 after 6 years, he could hardly find the strength to get out of bed. Simon sat down at his laptop and typed a heartfelt post for the Transcendence Network, struggling to find the right words for his final sentence. He drank again and then posted it soon after he passed out from the alcohol. Hours later, a notification from his laptop woke him up groggy. He thought he had just fallen asleep, but a sudden panic hit him. He wondered if he had written something strange while drunk. Rushing to open the site, he was surprised to see supportive comments from the Transcendent members. Lord Commander Gareth told him to keep moving forward no matter what. Dragon Lord Lee Monza reminded him that life was short and that even he had once faced similar challenges. Pon promised to visit and have a drink with him once he saved enough points. Shadow King Dagwang advised him that true strength came from taking that first step. Simon was moved by their unexpected encouragement and thanked them all. He didn't realize that a gate had opened behind him. Just then a rough iron-like voice called out to him, calling him the unemployed bum. Seaman froze in fear, not daring to turn around. He guessed from the voice that it belonged to one of the transcendent beings. Before he could react, he felt a hand on his back and a powerful energy surged through him. The mysterious figure spoke, acknowledging Seaman's struggles, his powerlessness, depression, weak resolve, and even his constitution, which had slowly worn down his mind and body. Pain shot through Seaman, and it felt like snakes crawling over his skin. He cried out in pain. The figure revealed that his ailment was called severed veins. As the transcendent being looked deeper into Sion's memories, it came across a memory where Sunan had scorned him, telling him not to show off. This memory made the transcendent pause in surprise. Simon managed to turn slightly, and the figure noticed the determined grip of his hand, which made him ask if Sion truly hadn't given up yet. The mysterious man withdrew his hand and then transported Sion to another place. As Sion looked around in confusion, the man introduced himself as Kma, the greatest martial artist in history. He then commanded Simon to declare that he was no coward. Sion felt a powerful energy coming from Kma, a strength so strong it seemed like it could make the world bow. While he had once been amazed by Grand Wizard Iona's power, Shammers was on a whole different level. Kiona told him to gather points and check the tips board, mentioning he had left something there specifically for him. Just as Shona turned to leave, tried to stop him, shouting for him to wait, but in the blink of an eye he was back in his room, hitting the floor with a thud. He quickly got up, wondering if the encounter had been a dream, but the sharp sting on his arm proved it had been real. Remembering Chin's words about courage, Seaman's body shook, but he felt an unexpected sense of lightness. He decided might finally be time to clean his room. Hours later, the room was spotless. The kitchen was organized, the trash was bagged, and every corner was neat and clutter-free. Pleased with his work, he looked at his hands and thought that the only trash left in the room was himself. Taking a moment, he looked at A's pedal, recalling their meeting and the things he had been told. Zipping up his jacket, he hesitated by the door, but then found the courage to step outside, repeating to himself that he wasn't a coward. A short while later, Sion found himself eating fried chicken. After running for 10 minutes, he was surprised by how hungry he was, but after seeing how much food he had already eaten, he realized it wasn't enough and decided to go for another run. While catching his breath, he felt his goals were overwhelming to handle on his own. Then he noticed a gym nearby and decided to check it out. When he entered the gym, he excused himself, but was stunned by the sight of an older man with a huge build lifting a massive barbell. Son was still dazed by the impressive sight when another man approached and asked if he was new and planning to work out. The older man introduced himself as Coach Kim Dioa, and Simon introduced himself in return. Diba immediately noted with amusement that he could smell chicken on Seaman, leaving him confused. B asked if he had just eaten and warned him about thinking he could start working out right after a cheap meal. Simon quickly apologized, but Diba grabbed his shoulder, urging him to start warming up. He told Sion that since he had come all this way, he should begin right away. Sion agreed, feeling a bit intimidated as they started. Dib touched Sion's arm and noticed something, commenting that he seemed to have done some exercise before. Sion admitted he had done a little in the past, and Dib enthusiastically slapped his back, encouraging him. He said Simon had a solid foundation and that they would work together to get him back in shape. Soon after, Simon found himself on the treadmill, running as if his life depended on it. Completely exhausted, D asked if he was tired, and Seaman said that he just needed a brief rest. Dib shouted back, saying that if he felt like collapsing, he should go ahead and collapse if he was meant to get back up. He would. Diobey reminded Sion that overthinking would hold him back from real change, though too worn out to reply. Sion pushed himself harder, realizing that his real obstacle wasn't a lack of aura but a lack of confidence. Seeing this spark of determination, Dakba yelled for him to keep going even if it killed him. With renewed greed, Simon responded to affirmatively. Hours later, aching and trembling, muttered that he was truly going to die, but the old man from earlier approached him with a thumbs up, commending him for his effort and saying he'd see him again tomorrow. Appreciating the compliment, Simon thanked him and felt the longer sense of accomplishment. Later, back in his apartment, Sion logged into the Transcendent network, feeling like he had made real progress that day. He remembered Chana's advice to check the tips board. He clicked on the notice board but got a message saying his access was denied because he didn't have enough points. Confused, he wondered how to earn points. Then the system showed his current member quest to reduce his weight to below 100 kilograms. Shocked, he couldn't believe it and questioned how he was supposed to accomplish such a goal. The next day, returned to the gym, determined to get his weight below 100 kilogram. His coach, noticing his dedication, shouted words of encouragement, telling him not to stop even if it was painful. Simon pushed himself to the limit, running 8.4 kilometers, shouting to keep his motivation high. A few days later, Sion stood in front of his bathroom mirror, examining his reflection. He wondered if he had lost any weight. Trying to stay positive, he told himself to give his best. That day, he headed outside and started running toward the gym, mentally preparing for some light cardio and interval training. As he ran, a woman passing by in the opposite direction noticed him. At first, she thought a wild boar was charging toward her, but quickly realized it was him. Looking notice lie slimmer. Later, while doing pull-ups, Simon reminded himself that strength only came from starting and kept repeating that he wasn't a coward despite the pain in his muscles. The woman, now nearby with a water bottle, watched his effort. When he took a break to drink, she commented on how hard he was working, mentioning she had noticed his frequent visits and found his dedication rare, still catching his breath. Sion acknowledged her comment and mentioned he was leaving. This left the woman surprised and a little irritated, as she had gone out of her way to talk to him. As he resumed his run, he caught a faint scent of a raider in the air. He guessed the woman's scent suggested she had surpassed the blue mark raiders were known for their physical abilities far beyond ordinary humans. Even blue mark raiders, the lowest grade, held considerable power over regular people. Simon thought back to his training days, remembering the huge gap between raiders and ordinary humans, and even the hierarchy among raiders themselves. It felt like an unbridgeable wall. The woman suddenly turned in his direction and sprinted toward him, easily catching up before darting past him. She teasingly called him a fat uncle and waved as she ran off, taunting him that no matter how hard he worked, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Her comment left him feeling frustrated. That evening, back in his apartment, Simon went straight to his laptop, curious about the day's posts on the Transcendent Network. He spotted a post from Aina and thought back to how intimidating she had seemed at first, only to realize that she had a surprisingly kind side. Shaking his head, he reminded himself that iron was far beyond his reach and turned his attention to his quests. He clicked on the quest to check his weight. Closing his eyes, he silently hoped he had reached his goal, but the scale showed 100.2 kilograms, just over the mark. Frustrated, he jumped to his feet and rushed to the bathroom, wondering if he could lose that tiny bit extra to finally break 100 kilograms. After emptying his system completely, he weighed himself again, only to see the scale reading 100.5 kilograms. Frustrated, he shouted in exasperation, calling it petty and maddening. Determined, he sniffed and coughed to rid his body of every last drop of water. Finally, the notification confirmed he had reached 99.9 kilograms. As a reward for completing his quest, he received 100 points on the Transcendent Network. He saw that the tips board required members to be level 2 or higher, which could be unlocked with exactly 100 points. Excited, he upgraded his level and clicked on the tips board, amazed at the wealth of advice shared by various members. The system explained that reading a post on the tips board would cost 100 points, while posting would cost 200 points, but he could earn 10 points for each view his post received. Shocked by the intricate setup, he marveled at the possibilities. As he browsed, he noticed a post titled "Learn to Grow the World Tree with Aina," which caught his attention. Then the system notified him that as a first-time visitor to the tips board, he could read one post for free. Senan was thrilled when he selected the post titled *Void Severance* from the legendary martial artist Heavenly Demon Dyoko Chien. The post explained that *Void Severance* was the ultimate path of void manipulation. It described how Chief starts in the lower Danion and must circulate through the body to complete a full cycle. However, individuals with disrupted meridians couldn't maintain this cycle, and their inner energy would fade like smoke. As Simon read, he was astonished to realize this was exactly his condition. His eyes filled with tears. The post went on to explain that with the right cultivation method, one could restore the flow of inner energy and escape this weakened state. Charmer had shared this transcendent skill with him, encouraging him to cherish it and follow the prescribed incantation. Simon followed the instructions, reciting the words to activate the Taj Jutsu flow, the name of this divine skill. Afterward, he stood in silence, reflecting. Up until that point, he had always viewed aura as something to dominate and control, but Shu treated aura as if it had its own will, a living essence to be understood and guided. This revelation felt like the answer he'd been searching for all along. After 3 months of hard physical and mental training, Simon sat on the bench press, focusing deeply on controlling his aura. The intense training had been very difficult, but he reminded himself that if this method could finally free him from his limitations, he would endure it 100 times if needed. Leaning forward, he kept concentrating on his aura, picturing it as carefully as spreading a needle, just like Du Chinma had taught him. He remembered Chin's words about aura: it flows like water and spreads like roots. Focusing on the block points in his circulation, Simon pushed forward, trying to break through with a single powerful surge. Suddenly he felt his aura flowing freely through his head and hands. With a shout of excitement, he realized he had succeeded. Though he collapsed back onto the bench exhausted, he smiled, knowing he was getting stronger. Later at Tesson Academy, a private rage training facility, the coach was watching students train when one of them informed him that someone was there to see him. Coach Wan Jong-hun hurried to the entrance, where he was greeted by a familiar face. Overwhelmed, Jong-hun congratulated Simon, expressing his pride and saying he'd always believed in him, regardless of whether he became a raider or not. Hugging him warmly, Jong-hun suggested they grab a drink to celebrate. Calling him brother, Sion explained he was there for a different reason and demonstrated his newly flowing aura, leaving Jong-hun stunned. Impressed, Jong-hun quickly told the other students to continue self-training while he led Simon to measure his aura. A short while later, Simon stood in the aura measuring machine. His eyes closed as he waited for Jong-hun's reaction. Jong-hun urged him to open his eyes, and when he did he saw his aura level was 1034. Tears filled his eyes as Jan-hun congratulated him, saying his curse had finally been lifted. Stepping out of the machine, Sion was amazed that just a month of consistent aura circulation using the ultimate supreme technique had accomplished what he had struggled with for years. Jong-hun, equally shocked, asked how he had managed to do it. Sion explained that he had simply followed advice from a chance encounter. Fascinated, Jong-hun suggested they test his abilities further by sparring with a particularly overconfident student who relied too much on his aura level. Confident that Simon could humble the student, Jong-hun asked if he was up for the challenge, and Simon agreed. Soon after, they were in the academy's training hall with Simon standing on the stage alongside Jong-hun and his opponent, the student Yugin Si. Skeptical Jinny questioned Jong-hun about sparring with Simon and asked what his aura level was. Jong-hun replied that it was around 1000, which made Jin say glare. He wondered if Jong-hun was seriously pairing him with someone who had just barely reached that level. Assuming Senon was Jong-h's prized disciple, Jin Si introduced himself and Sion returned the introduction. They took their positions for an unarmed fight, and at the referee's signal the match began. Jin Si immediately lunged forward, trying to crush Simon with raw aura alone. Sion easily dodged, ducked his head, and countered with a punch to Jin Se's face. However, the impact sent a painful tremor up his arm as if he had struck a wall. Jin S noticed and teasingly asked if he was all right as Sion pulled back. Jin Si complimented him on having basic skills, then dashed forward, kicking Suman with increased force and warning him that things were only beginning. The kick threw Seaman across the ring, but instead of standing he waited as Jinri charged again, certain he would finish the match at the last second. Seaman grabbed Jin's foot, lifting and pulling him off balance. Surprised, Jin found himself thrown to the mat, wondering if Simon was using grappling techniques. Sion slammed Jin Si onto the stage. He knew that most raiders didn't spend much time practicing martial arts. Raiders usually fought monstrous creatures that weren't humanoid, so hand-to-hand combat skills weren't as important, but here it was a different story. As Simon held him down, Jin said tried to kick him with his free foot, but Simon quickly jumped back, dodging the attack. The students laughed, teasing Jinri for kicking the air. Embarrassed, JY got up and faced Suman again with a more furious expression. He charged forward and threw a punch, but Suman ducked just in time and landed a powerful uppercut, knocking Jin's back onto the stage floor before Jin Si could recover. Seaman wrapped his legs around him and grabbed his arm, putting him in an arm bar. Furious, Jainu surrounded his hands with a strong aura and tried to punch Seaman. The other students, including Jong-hun, watched in panic, knowing how dangerous Jin's punches could be. Staying calm despite the danger, Sion snapped Jin's arm to stop him from going out of control. Later, as Sion jogged through the streets, he reminded himself not to get too excited. After all, Jinny hadn't trained properly or shown much passion, and Simon's win was just the result of months of hard practice. Still, even though he tried to stay humble, he couldn't hide the smile on his face. The next day, Senon was back at the gym, training his newly built muscles. After finishing a set with a heavy barbell, he caught his breath and noticed two students standing at the entrance, staring at him in awe. They whispered to each other, wondering if they should approach him. He saw that one of them was holding a flyer with his before and after transformation. Simon stood up silently and flexed his muscles, pretending to comment on the heat. The students watched him in amazement, until one wearing glasses called him uncle. Annoyed, S asked what the student meant by uncle. The student quickly corrected himself, calling him brother instead, and asked if it was true that Simon's body had transformed in just 3 months. Simon proudly replied that it was true. The student, his eyes full of hope, asked if he could achieve the same results. Sion told him that it wasn't that simple and that they had to start by paying respect to the boss first. Coach BA appeared behind them and reminded the students that they should show respect to the boss. The students turned around in fear as Dakba greeted them, calling them new members. He tightly gripped their shoulders and led them to his office. Once inside, he introduced himself, though nervous. The students followed him. Moments later, screams of terror echoed from the office. The students came out shortly after, looking completely exhausted. Diok explained to Simon that they had agreed to follow his training plan. Simon laughed and asked if Di thought they would last. The students replied that they had even signed an agreement, showing unexpected determination. Simon gave them a thumbs up and wished them luck, which they acknowledged with awkward smiles. Remembering something, Sion checked his phone and opened his Transcendent network account. He browsed the tip board for new martial arts techniques and noticed that the site was now accessible on mobile. He found a technique titled The Beginning of Martial Arts Training by Qin Yuan. Soon after, the two students lay exhausted on the gym floor. The one with glasses admitted that he felt like he was already dying. Even on the first day, both students glanced over at Seaman, who was stretching his arm up and down in a diagonal direction, Repeatedly they watched in amazement as a faint blue aura radiated from his body. Realizing he must be a raider, the student with curly hair remarked that Simon was like a senior to them, and the other student nodded in agreement. Impressed by his dedication, days later, Sion returned to the gym and noticed people staring at him during his workouts. He soon realized it was the skinny nerdy new eye from earlier who was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Simon wondered why the kid was paying so much attention to him. He told himself that he wasn't interested in guys. Just then the nerd approached him, catching him off guard. The nerd admitted that he had been watching Simon for a while and had figured something out about him. Simon, confused, asked what he meant. With excitement in his voice, the nerd said that he had discovered Simon's identity. Stunned and a little nervous, Sion asked what the nerd meant by identity. The nerd laughed and assured him that he didn't need to hide it. Feeling relieved, Sion admitted that he was a raider. He was glad the nerd wasn't asking about anything related to the Transcendent Network. Simon clarified that he wasn't officially a raider yet, but would be taking the qualification test soon. The nerd, who knew the test was a month away, said he was envious and wished he could take it too. This surprised Simon. The nerd then showed his aura and explained that he was also an awakened one. Curious, Sion asked why he wasn't attending a raider academy. The nerd explained that his parents thought being a raider was too dangerous, so they wanted him to focus on his studies until he was an adult. However, he still wanted to build up his strength. He added that many top raiders had been late bloomers, and that becoming a true raider required not just aura but also hours of training and effort. The nerd confidently said that he would definitely become a raider. Amused, Simon asked why he was so sure. The nerd smiled and replied that being a raider was the top career choice for middle and high school students in Korea, because it was a cool job. Simon asked if he could control his aura, and when the nerd said yes, he encouraged him to try. Hesitant but eager, the nerd sat down, focused, trying to control his aura while Sion watched. Impressed, Simon praised the nerd's technique and asked where he learned it. The nerd explained that he had followed a beginner's course by Raider Suan, and Sion chuckled and advised him to keep practicing since controlling aura was important. Then, with a hint of encouragement, he told the nerd that they were in this together and should aim to reach the top. The compliment boosted the nerd's confidence and he eagerly agreed, walking away with a big smile, talking excitedly to his friends. Watching the kids' excitement, S felt it was a promising start for him. With renewed determination, he slapped his face lightly, reminding himself to keep doing his best. Too later, back in his room, S opened the next tip on the Transcendent Network, titled The Fundamentals of Aura Manipulation. Covering his mouth in excitement, he thought how just hearing the title made him eager to dive in. He mentally told Shma to wait a little longer, grateful for the tips board, which was proving helpful for improving his basics. Curious, he checked the general board and saw a post from PP mentioned he had been busy dating lately and jokingly asked if Simon was jealous. Iona, never wanting to miss a chance to have fun, commented, poking fun at person's appearance and questioning what dating even meant for someone with a face like his. Smiling, Simon noted how peaceful the dimension felt with their familiar banter. He then searched for information on the upcoming Raider qualification test and saw that the in-depth test, considered the toughest part of the exam, was random again this year. The in-depth test, known for its unique and unpredictable challenges, often determined the final results. Even those who passed the written measurement and combat evaluation sections could still fail this final stage. Recalling last year's test, Simon remembered there had been a debate section. He wondered aloud how debates could help raiders, considering the job was about fighting and killing monsters. Just then he noticed a flyer advertising exclusive prediction questions for the in-depth test. At first he thought only overly cautious people would waste money on something like that, but after staring at the screen for a moment, he found himself calling the number on the flyer to ask about the price, how reliable the information was, and whether they had a contact within the association. After provided him with the details, he immediately transferred the money, admitting to himself that he had become one of those overly cautious guys. Setting down his phone, he thought to himself that he was now fully prepared and confident soon the world would know the name Lee Swan. The next day, Simon was at the park working out on a pull-up bar. He paused, sensing a familiar presence nearby. When he turned, he saw the woman he had met before out for a run. She noticed him too, and despite his effort to avoid her, she approached. She said she recognized him, though he remained silent. She then commented on how much weight he had lost, saying she almost didn't recognize him. Feeling irritated, Simon dismissed her, telling her not to bother him and to move along. Picking up on his annoyance, she apologized for her previous comment and introduced herself as Kim Soo-ha. Begrudgingly, he introduced himself as well. Sinner asked if he was a raider, and he replied that he was preparing to take the test soon. She encouraged him, mentioning that she would be cheering for her company's rookie too. Sion, with a touch of arrogance, said that sounded interesting, irritated by his attitude. Sono warned him not to underestimate her rookie when she called her companies. Next day, smirking Simon suggested they make a bet when she asked what kind of bet. He proposed that they see who performed better, her rookie or him. He added that the loser would have to grant the winner one wish. Unimpressed, Suha questioned if he even had the nerve to follow through, giving him a disapproving look. She reminded how he used to be morbidly obese. Annoyed, Sion told her to stop and demanded to know how she could dismiss him so easily. A month later at 7:50 a.m. Sion stood among the large crowd of participants at the entrance to the Raider qualification exam room. He had dark bags under his eyes, but silently thanked Chana and Elle for their guidance. He trusted their help in preparing him for this moment. While scanning the crowd, he spotted Jinri and wondered if he was also taking the test, reminding himself that he couldn't afford to last behind. Simon stretched his arms and headed toward the entrance, feeling confident and ready. During the written exam, Suman quickly noticed the questions were much harder this year. They included complex ancient texts and tricky questions designed to confuse. Despite this, he appreciated the challenge, thinking all his studying would pay off if the test was this demanding. After finishing the last question, he leaned back in relief. Noticing that many others around him were struggling, he began to wonder what the practical portion of the exam would be like if the written part was already this tough. Moments later, a bell rang, signaling the end of the exam. The examiners instructed everyone to put down their pens and hand in their sheets, warning that any further movement would result in disqualification. Swan raised both hands to show he was following the rules. However, he noticed the man next to him still scribbling in a panic. Suddenly, a strong purple aura wrapped around the man's neck. The examiner, unimpressed, reminded everyone that the warning had been clear. He announced that 3 participants were disqualified and ordered them to leave immediately. Suman watched in shock, realizing that the examiner was a gold-mark raider. The examiner addressed the room, explaining that raiders often face life or death situations and strict adherence to rules was essential. Even small acts of leniency, like thinking what's the big deal, could endanger an entire team. He emphasized that rules were a raider's lifeline and those who couldn't respect them didn't belong. Adjusting his glasses, the examiner gave a small smile and wished everyone luck. The participants respectfully thanked him before moving on. As Seaman left the exam room, he overheard other participants talking about how hard the test was. Many were worried they might fail, especially since the aura measurement part was coming up. Sim agreed the test was tough, but felt confident he hadn't failed. Placing his hands in position, he began controlling his aura. He knew the Raider qualification exam required an aura level of over 5,000, and the last time each checked, his aura had reached 5,100. While he focused, some participants noticed his aura use, but he stayed calm. His concentration wavered briefly as memories of his military service surfaced, filling him with frustration and dark thoughts. Determined, he reminded himself of Chin's teachings about the supreme ultimate, a principle that symbolizes harmony, combining yin and yang, heaven, earth, and humanity. It also embodied the virtues of origin, growth, benefit, and integrity. As he worked on cultivating his aura, memories flooded his mind. He thought about moments when he had been bullied, the first time he shared his dream of becoming a raider, and the unwavering support of his adopted parents. They had believed in him completely, even though he wasn't their biological child. Simon opened his eyes, his thoughts still on his parents, when he was startled by the examiner standing beside him. The examiner asked what he was doing and reminded him that cultivating aura in a safe place was important. Sion quickly bowed and apologized to sincerely. The examiner patted his shoulder and reassured him, saying that sometimes rules don't apply. He shared how he had once been forced to cultivate aura in monster-infested forest just to survive. The examiner went on to explain that raiders rarely get breaks and admitted he hadn't had proper rest since joining the profession. Sen respectfully mentioned that the examiner must have been through many dangerous battles. The examiner laughed and agreed, saying that every battle had its risks, but one stood out the most: a gate subjugation. He shared a memory of facing a rare monster from the monster encyclopedia called the Black Castle. No matter how much they attacked, the monster didn't stop moving forward. It was a terrifying experience that stayed with him because he couldn't defeat it during that encounter. Since then, no one had ever seen it again, making it both rare and unsettling. The examiner was about to reveal who had been the leader of his team during that mission when a knock on the door interrupted them. A staff member reminded him that the aura measurement we close soon. Nodding, the examiner told Seaman to head to the first floor quickly and wished him good results. Sion thanked him sincerely when Simon arrived on the first floor. He told the desk attendant he was there for aura measurement. She asked him to wait. In line. As he waited, he noticed the participants around him whispering in amazement. Confused, Simon overheard someone leaving the measurement area, looking shocked and saying that the result was unbelievable. Curious, Simon asked what had happened, and the participant explained that the person just measured had an aura level over 30,000. Senon was shocked, struggling to believe such an incredible power level. He remembered that even the strongest raiders didn't come close to that level. The top-ranked raiders usually had levels around 20,000, which made him even more curious about who this powerful person could be. The man in front of him whispered that her name was Bang Bai, and mentioned that she was said to be very beautiful. Sun began to wonder if Uai was really a girl around him. Others were murmuring about how she seemed to have everything: power, looks, and luck. They grumbled about how unfair life was. Feeling annoyed, Seaman started to suspect that Ubai might be the rookie Sun Ha had mentioned. Curious, he asked the man in front of them if anyone had been disqualified. The man confidently replied that no one had scored below the minimum requirement of 5,000. Embarrassed, Simon laughed, nervously remembering his own previous reading had barely been 5,100 when it was finally his turn. The doctor informed him that he would be the last participant and directed him to lie down in the machine. Simon got into position, feeling nervous as the machine started measuring his aura. He clenched his hands tightly, waiting anxiously for the result. A few moments later, the doctor called his name and announced his aura level as 7,180. Senon was speechless, tears welled up in his eyes as he thanked the doctor. Bowing repeatedly, he loudly expressed his gratitude to Kumar. Overcome with emotion, he shook the doctor's hand and wished him good luck for the year ahead. Nearby officers watched with curiosity, wondering if he had broken a record or achieved something extraordinary. Walking out of the examination area, Simon felt pure joy as he moved down the corridor. He received a message asking how the test had gone. He quickly replied, asking when school ended and suggesting they meet up because he wanted to treat them to a meal. A short while later, Simon sat at a lively street cafe, humming cheerfully and admiring how beautiful everything looked. Suddenly he spotted Sunyo walking down the street with her team. Her presence stood out immediately and he felt irritated, wondering why she always had to show off for status as a raider. His eyes lingered on the swords they carried, and he became lost in thought. He didn't notice a hand reaching toward him from behind until a nerdy student called out to him, cheerfully addressing him as brother. Startled, Sion turned to see the eager student asking how his test had gone. Simon, ring with excitement, replied that it had gone amazingly well. Then he asked the group what they wanted to eat, and they all shouted the same answer: pork belly. A moment later, they enjoy a meal together. Sion proudly announced that he was treating them today and told them to eat until they were full, as this wasn't something he did every day. The nerd, impressed by Sion's grilling skills, jokingly suggested that he should open a barbecue restaurant instead of becoming a raider, calling his cooking a masterpiece. Sion dismissed the idea, claiming his talents were far too important for such a job and that it would be a national loss. The nerd playfully argued back, insisting he was the one with real talent. Annoyed, Sion turned to another student with curly hair, GY, and jokingly told him to give the nerd a light smack, pointing his tongs at the group. Simon reminded them that some people needed regular discipline. The nerd, unbothered, warned that hitting them would count as attempted murder. The restaurant door opened and Suho walked in with her team. Simon felt irritated by their arrival, and his mood worsened when has spotted him and pointed him out to UAJN, mentioned that Simon was the one who supposedly claimed he could chew her up like an old piece of gum with a cold expression. Ubi introduced herself and Sion introduced himself in return, feeling shocked as he realized that the rookie with a 30,000 aura level was actually Sun Ha's prodigious Sonia, and her team walked away. She reminded him to enjoy his meal and not forget their bet. Sen tried to call her back to explain he never actually said what she claimed, but she ignored him, leaving him annoyed. After they finished eating, the students thanked Sion for the meal. The nerd couldn't help but ask about the women they saw, commenting on their looks. Sion cautioned him, saying it wasn't right to judge people based on appearances. Putting his arms around the students, he advised them to choose their friends wisely. Then he suggested going to karaoke for round 2, and Jim eagerly agreed. As they walked together, Sion suddenly felt something strange, a crack forming in the air behind him. Alarmed, he turned toward the building they had just left. The unsettling feeling reminded him of the gate he had once encountered in his room. The nerd, noticing his reaction, asked if something was wrong. Simon seriously urged the other two to leave, quickly giving them a firm push. Confused, they hesitated, but Simon whispered the word gate under his breath. Inch looked puzzled, but before they could understand, Simon shouted that a gate was opening. At that moment, the crack in the air widened into a gaping hole. A snarling monster known as a Sinkus emerged from it. The creature, known as Hostile Monster Number 22, growled deeply, sending chills through the group as they froze in shock. Suddenly it let out an ear-piercing scream, shattering nearby glass and causing people to flee in terror. However, Simon found himself unable to move, his body frozen in fear. Just then Suha's team arrived, introducing themselves as the Iron Horse Company and urging everyone to evacuate Sinho quickly. Assigned Ui to guide the rescue team, and Uai nodded in agreement. Seaman knew the Iron Horse Company wasn't one of the top 3 raid organizations, but they were well known for their elite small team operations. Shona and her team charged toward the monster. Sin channeled her aura into her sword and slashed at it. She was momentarily stunned when more creatures emerged from the gate. They were labeled as hazardous monster number 8, known as Jorg. The Jorgs moved with alarming speed, darting past her. She shouted for someone to stop them as one Jorg sank its teeth into a bystander's arm, tearing it apart. Zenon remained rooted to the spot while feeling overwhelmed. He knew he had trained for moments like this, but his body refused to move nearby. NJ, armed with only a wooden stick, struck the Jord, knocking it to the ground. However, the creature quickly got back up, unharmed, and turned its attention toward Inge. As Simon watched, he noticed something extraordinary. Even though Inge had no formal training, he seemed to understand the flow of battle. Instinctively, it occurred to Simon that Inge might have the potential to become a natural-born raider. Inge dropped the stick and delivered a powerful kick, sending the Jorg stumbling back. Simon thought that with proper training, Inge could become an outstanding raider. Before Inge could recover, another jaw launched itself at him, biting down on his arm and tearing it off. The sight of MJ's injury spurred Sion into action. He finally broke free from his fear and sprinted toward Inge, shouting his name and preparing to attack the Jorg. Before he could strike, a spear flew past him, hitting the Jorg in the head and killing it instantly. A raider approached and asked as Simon was all right. Simon assured him he was fine, but noted that Inge was badly injured. Holding Inge, Simon urged him to stay conscious. Inge weakly laughed, saying he wasn't going to die. The raider began to bandage NJ's wound, but Simon offered to do it himself. The raider asked if Simon was an awakened one and explained that the rescue team would arrive soon, leaving Inge cared at him in the meantime. As Simon wrapped the bandage around NJ's torn arm, he realized with frustration that even though he had used his aura to stop the bleeding, the arm was still lost. Just then 2 more Jorges advanced toward them. Shonhao managed to release a powerful aura, successfully drawing the monsters' attention. One of her teammates asked if she was okay, and she mentioned that the monsters were surprisingly quick for their size. Watching the Sinkers, she said it was hard to get close to its head, even though she was aiming for its vital spots. Her partner then told her that the support team from Wanga had arrived and suggested they work together to defeat it. Sooner agreed, proposing that her partner distract the cause while she struck it down in one decisive blow. When the reinforcements arrived, the Sinkers turned its attention toward them. Sinner moved to the side as her partner engaged the creature head, and to keep it occupied, she climbed onto a nearby building and then onto a smaller one, reaching a high spot for an attack. From there, she aimed carefully and leaped toward the Sinkers head, channeling her aura into her sword. She drove it straight into the creature's skull with all her strength. The monster twitched slightly, tilting its head, but then fell lifeless to the ground as the team confirmed that the Sinkus was no longer moving. Soon has sat down beside its body, completely exhausted. The support team brought the healers forward while everyone watched the gate start to close. An announcement warned that complete gate annihilation would occur in 10 seconds. Suman, still holding Inge, looked up at the gate but suddenly noticed a red glow inside it. Staring closer, he was shocked to see a creature within a monster he recognized as Disaster Monster Number 1 and work. Even as the gate shut, the creature on the other side kept staring until the portal was completely sealed. Once silence returned, someone called out to him, prompting Sion to nervously ask if he was okay. With a trace of pride, he simply asked if the person they had saved was still alive. Sion nodded, assuring him that the rescue had been successful. Yu, with determination, reminded him that even though he didn't look like it, he was still a trained raider and felt it was only natural to do his part. Se agreed, admiring NJ's resolve. Days passed after that intense event, and the city quickly returned to normal. People resumed their daily lives, but Simon found himself troubled. The terrifying experience of facing monsters stayed with him. He realized that without Sonia and her team, he might not have survived. Later, while lifting a heavy barbell at the gym, memories of NJ's arm being torn apart by the monster filled him with anger. Fueled by determination, he lifted the weights repeatedly. Eventually, Coach Diok B called out, suggesting it was time for him to head home. Surprised Summon checked the time and realized how late it was. Deo Ba then seriously asked if Simon wanted to grab a drink together. A short while later, they sat at a nearby food stall sharing drinks. To apologized for what had happened to Inge. Suman hesitantly asked if Diok had known he was an awakened one. Dib confirmed, mentioning he knew Simon had passed the first test. Simon admitted that during the battle he had frozen, unable to act. Angry with himself, he confessed that his hesitation had led to Inge getting hurt. He questioned whether he was truly fit to become a raider. Pouring another drink, Dib looked at Seaman and revealed something unexpected. He used to be a boxer before opening the gym. Shocked, Simon asked if he was serious. Dib laughed, telling him not to be so. Surprised, he explained that he had once been quite agile. Simon teasingly replied that he must have been a skilled fighter. Dob chuckled but then grew serious, sharing that his boxing career ended painfully. He had a rival who was like a younger brother to him. The rival tragically died in the ring during a match. Since then, Dob hadn't been able to step back into the ring. Suman listened closely as Dyak explained why he was sharing this story. He wanted to stop Simon from being assumed by regret. Firmly, Deba told him to let go of the past. He asked if Seaman planned to keep hiding and crying in his room. Embarrassed, Sion stammered that he wasn't. Dib continued, saying that no one is perfect. Even he had regrets about that final match, knowing his rival couldn't go on, but he had to keep moving forward. Mistakes and regrets were part of life, but fear couldn't be allowed to hold him back. Feeling encouraged, Seaman raised his cup and they toasted. After a moment, Dob a joke, asking if Sion thought he could have beaten him in his prime. Sion confidently replied that he might have. Dib punched the air playfully, proudly claiming that his younger self had been a force to be reckoned with. Although he admitted age might now give Sion an edge, he encouraged him to become a strong raider. Sion drank with renewed determination, his confidence growing. The next day at Tayson Academy's VR simulation room, Sion prepared for another training session with Jong-hun. Jong-hun asked if he was sure about facing a strong opponent like the Jorg. Sion, holding his sword, confidently said he was ready. The virtual Jorg appeared and charged at him. Simon blocked its attack and with a quick strike cut it in half. As the creature disappeared, he realized it had felt weaker than he expected. Jong-hun reminded him to stay focused and not let fear or anger take over. When Jong-hun asked if he wanted to continue, Sion nodded, his resolve firm, and asked to face Ayu's next